Welcome back to the Astrology Report, this time for September 18th through September 24th of 2023. My name is Cam White. If you don't know me already, make sure you hit the like button. It really helps me out. Comment below. Let me know how this Mercury retrograde has been for you, as well as if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, if you want to keep up to date with all of the astrological weather. This is not the biggest week in the world. However, I mean, it is a big week. Make sure to stay tuned. It's a big week. I'm just kidding. It's probably not that big of a week, but let's go ahead and talk about it anyway. So we're starting the week off on Monday with just the moon ingressing into Scorpio. It will make a trine to Saturn and it will sextile Mercury. You know, you guys, I always say, you always know what I'm going to say, but the moon in Scorpio, if we're talking about our emotions, our body, how we feel day to day, the moon's going to be in fall, meaning it doesn't really do all that well in Scorpio. If Scorpio is like, you know, resentment, pain, holding on to things, of course, the moon doesn't do all that well there. However, there are times to explore those emotions. There are times to feel those emotions. This time around, I think as the moon makes the trine to Saturn and sextiles Mercury, this isn't necessarily like bad. Like this is a little bit more of like exploring pain, exploring resentment, exploring what are the things that you're holding on to. Not in a confrontational way where it's like, oh, I'm holding on to this and I can't let go. So let me figure out other ways to, you know, resist that or to escape it. Thing is just the moon goes into Scorpio and it trines Saturn. It's kind of like sometimes it's good to sit in pain. Sometimes it's good to sit in sorrow or grief even. And it'll make that trine to Saturn. And of course, Saturn's in Pisces, where if Saturn's about responsibility, maturity, it's in the sign of like, you know, our spiritual emotions, our, you know, more inward, more feminine kind of spirituality. And I just kind of look at it as kind of like a hardening process where the moon in Scorpio doesn't have to be this soft, sad story, but a little bit more of like, you know, when you're doing something in life and you know that you should be doing something else, you're doing something bad, and there comes a moment where you kind of sit in the bullshit, in your bullshit. You're like, I don't like this. I'm not comfortable with this. What is it going to take to do something different? Like, it's always good to remember the pain of where you were, of what you don't like, so that you can use that as fuel and motivation to get where you want to go. And that's how I look at this moon in Scorpio transit. Because after it trines Saturn, where there's a little bit of that like impression, that kind of, hey, remember this is an important emotion. It's going to sextile Mercury, where Mercury's still in Virgo. It is now direct. Things are moving forward. I like this week for a lot of forward movement stuff. But as the moon sextiles Mercury, this is just being able to use that, you know, pain or that sorrow or that grief or that uncomfortability to help us kind of map out what the future looks like. It's like, how often do you want to feel like shit? How often do you want to feel this way? Do you want to feel this way anymore? Well, if you don't, it's time to make a plan, stick to the plan. Now that Mercury's direct, there's no excuses to be not moving forward with things. And then we get to Tuesday, the moon will then go opposite Jupiter. It will square Venus and then go opposite Uranus. And, you know, one of the highlights that we have on Tuesday is going to be the sun going opposite Neptune. So kind of a little bit of a mixed bag of emotions here, because let's just start off talking about the moon going opposite. I mean, my bad. The sun going opposite Neptune. If the sun is, again, the brightest thing in the sky, you know, if you look at it, you'll go blind, and the sun's in Virgo, there's a need or an energy or a willpower to investigate things in a finer detail, to organize things. You know, again, like historically speaking, this is when we harvest the wheat. We're counting how many bales we have, doing all the math and crunching all the numbers. The sun going opposite Neptune, I mean, again, I talk about this every year in Virgo season since I've been doing astrology, because I've only been doing astrology with Neptune and Pisces. It's peering through the veil. It's, you know, because I do like YouTube, I've gotten into cinematography, and when now I watch other YouTubers, and there's certain YouTubers that are like, their content is just so good in terms of like their video quality and their editing. Mine's one of the best because I have Parker, but sometimes when you look at someone's like video, you can kind of see where maybe they did something wrong. You know, maybe they were shooting everything in 24 frames a second. Or maybe they were shooting everything in like 60 frames a second, but there's one clip that's like 24 frames a second. And so it's a little bit choppy, and it kind of takes you out of the experience. The one thing that I've said a few different times before with the sun going opposite Neptune is like if you're looking for it, you'll find it. It's the same thing like with movies. Like, I've been getting really into guns lately, and something that whole community talks about is like how in movies guns are so like they do everything wrong. And the thing is, the reason I'm using that as an analogy is it takes you out of the experience. It takes you out of what the movie is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be a story. It's supposed to be entertaining. It's supposed to immerse you. And when you're too critical of every detail, you don't get to enjoy the experience. And so I think at the sun opposite Neptune, it's like, okay, if you're looking for something for it to not be exactly the way that you envisioned it, like you're going to find it, but you can't let that take you out of the experience, right? Like you can watch a movie and be like, oh, they did that wrong. Or, and there's tons of other things that they do wrong in movies, but you can't let that take you out of the experience. It's going to be really easy to be critical. And also on Tuesday, the moon will go opposite Jupiter. It will square Venus and go opposite Uranus. So as the moon's in Scorpio going opposite Jupiter and Taurus, coming back to what I said about Monday, where, it's good to kind of sit in your bullshit and in that pain to kind of remind yourself, like, I no longer want to feel this way. What do I need to do so I no longer feel this way? And you can, imprint that emotion into your subconscious to where whenever you're, backtracking or, losing hope, you can just remember that feeling of like, I never want to feel this way again. And that is one of the biggest motivators to doing anything that you want to do in your life. But as it goes opposite Jupiter, you have to understand like patience. Like you're never going to get out of a bad situation overnight. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it takes some hope and some faith to be able to take one step at a time. And I think as the moon goes opposite Jupiter, there's kind of a questioning of that faith or a questioning of that hope. Like, God, is it really going to be able to, like, it's like, when you plant flowers or you plant a garden, there's a time where you just kind of go like, are these things ever going to come up? Are they even growing? Did I do something wrong? And so the moon going opposite Jupiter is just, you have to be patient. You have to understand this is all a part of the process. You're not going to get all of your gains overnight. It is a process and it's going to take some time. Jupiter's retrograde. But with Jupiter being retrograde, this isn't like a Jupiter being direct is like kind of seeing the results almost instantaneously versus Jupiter retrograde is like, hey, I know that this is the work that I need to do now. I need to like keep having that faith, keep being consistent, like slow and steady wins the race. What did I say a couple weeks ago? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And then after the moon goes opposite Jupiter, it pretty much immediately squares Venus. And the issue with this is none of it looks pretty. Like, for example, I know I've talked a lot about like doing music and everything like that. And trust me, I still am. And there's a part of me that just wants to post because I've got like quite a few songs like ready to go. I want to post it. I want to do it. But like for me, in order to do it right, rather than just being hasty and just posting it, like I really want to take it professionally. There's a certain level of, professionalism that I aspire to be in this. So, and there's part of me that like, I hate talking about the music. I hate not having it out for you guys. I hate not like I hate it. I genuinely do. But I know if I jump the gun, I will hate that even more because I would rather be fully prepared and have everything ready to go than be underprepared. And I look at the moon in Scorpio opposite Venus and Leo. It's like, you're not going to get like that attention. It's not going to look pretty during the, the growth phase. It's like, if you've ever lost weight or if you've gone through a health transformation, it's like, you don't just, change your diet and work out once and then all of a sudden you look amazing. There's a slow process where you're going to not look, you'll look kind of somewhat the same for a few weeks and then you'll slowly start looking a little bit better and better. And then, after like a year or so time, you'll start to look really, really good. And that moon in Scorpio squaring Venus and Leo is like, it doesn't feel good. Like when you're not immediately seeing the results of your work, there's a little bit of like, is this even worth it? Am I getting what I want out of this? And you just have to be patient. But I look at the moon squaring Venus is like, don't touch it. Like you're going to be okay. It's a slow process. Sure, you can't post that Instagram, body transformation thing. Sure, I can't post my music just yet, but you don't want to jump the gun. It's not going to look pretty. And there's going to be times where, like, again, if you make music, you understand there's times I listen to my music. I'm like, I'm also a Leo. So I'm like, this is fucking great. This is the best thing ever. And then there's other times I listen to it. I'm like, this fucking sucks. Like, I'm not even going to post this. Why did I do all this work? And that's kind of the vibe on Tuesday. But then after the moon squares Venus, it will go opposite Uranus. So there is an opportunity. And when I say opportunity, I don't mean that in like a positive sense to like say like, well, I want to do it now, so let me just jump the gun. That might be beneficial depending on your situation and what circumstance you are. but I'd probably argue it isn't. As the moon goes opposite Uranus, you're talking about a lot about like instability. Like the moon in Scorpio opposite Uranus and Taurus, I've talked a lot about this in the past, is like, call before you dig. Like if you're going to dig a hole, you might hit a gas line and then blow up. You don't really want to do that. Like you're like, okay, sure, you might want to dig a hole right now for whatever reason, but that doesn't mean you have to dig it right now. You should maybe be a little bit informed before you start just digging holes. So that moon opposite Uranus is that like emotional angst, that emotional impulsiveness to react. Like the moon in Scorpio is very reactionary. As it goes opposite Uranus and Taurus, it can totally destabilize things. You don't want to take the cake out of the oven before it's ready. That's maybe another good analogy. Like moon squaring Venus and Leo, it's kind of like you're looking at the cake in the oven. You're like, is this ready? I don't know. Something's not looking right. And then you take it out and then it's like, well, you never even gave it a chance to be ready. So the moon going opposite Uranus, there's an impulse. It's a good opportunity for impulse control. Things will kind of stir up your emotions, I think, all day on Tuesday, just with the moon and Scorpio in general. But you have to be able to go with the flow. Things aren't always going to go according to plan. And again, you can use that frustration to be more of a perfectionist. You can use that frustration to make sure you never have to experience that pain of, being underprepared or taking the cake out of the oven before it's ready. Like, again, I think the other part of that is like the sun's opposite Neptune. It's like, again, if you're looking at the cake, you're like, is there something wrong with this cake? Is there, like this isn't, rising right. I don't know how to fucking bake a cake, so I'm just making shit up here. But you're like looking through it through the oven glass, and the oven glass, as something I do know, is not like clear glass. It's a little distorted, so it can kind of throw you in for a loop. So Tuesdays, like things aren't going to be looking the way that you're expecting them to, and that could make you more emotionally impulsive to like act on it. And I would just suggest maybe holding out for a minute. So then we get to Wednesday, and the moon's going to ingress into Sagittarius and square Saturn, and that's most of the day. Like after the moon square Saturn, it will be applying to a square with Mercury, but it won't hit it until Thursday. But the moon will go into Sag. As I've been saying for a while now, the moon in Sagittarius just wants freedom and wants to explore and wants to have fun. Like, for example, again, let's go back to this cake analogy. Pull out the cake. Cool, it's ready to eat, right? No, you have to let it sit. You have to let it cool. Or like even a steak, for example. If you're going to cook a steak, that's something you do know how to do. You got to let it sit. You got to let it cool. You got to let it absorb all of those juices. And it's super easy to just jump the gun and be like, cool, steak, I'm ready to eat it right now, which is, I end up doing that anyway. But as the moon goes into Sag and square Saturn, you have to put a pause on things. You can't just go willy-nilly out into the future without some sort of a plan. Saturn is retrograde in Pisces, and we're getting closer and closer to Saturn stationing direct. That will not happen until November, but November is a lot closer than you think. It actually happens at the beginning of November. But Saturn's retrograde, and I would kind of ask, like, what have you kind of learned during Saturn retrograde in Pisces? Saturn being in Pisces, if Saturn's about maturity, responsibility, structure, limitations, it's in a mutable sign. It's in a water sign. So it's kind of like Saturn in Capricorn's easy. It's like stick to the system, stick to the plan, commit to it and you'll be fine. Saturn in Pisces is like where you have to be responsible or where you have to be mature about things. It changes from day to day. It's more of like an overall sense of responsibility and maturity. But it's Pisces. It's like a spiritual one. It's like an internal one. Like Saturn and Sag is like, Sagittarius is that outward view of the world that I want to go to. I'm at point A and I want to go to point B. And Saturn and Sag is like, okay, well, let's define that a little bit more. You can't just shoot out into nothing. Like what is your target? And, are you going to take the shot at the right moment? Saturn and Pisces is having that more like inner control, not being too fanciful or too hopeful about a specific, belief or whatever, but being much more rigid about it, being much more like, okay, if this is what I believe, then what am I about? And as Saturn's retrograde, it's just that learning process. I've talked a lot about Saturn being direct. It's kind of like you start a new job, you're getting on the spot training, and then Saturn goes retrograde. You're done with training, but it's like your first couple days on your own. You're still figuring things out for yourself. And that's where we're at. And so as the moon goes into Sag and square Saturn, there's this kind of like, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do here. I know I need to be more patient and but I want to explore and I want to do things, but I need to kind of sit still here for a moment and think about this and feel this out. So I do like that the moon goes into Sagittarius. That's always a fun feeling, way better than the moon going into Scorpio. But for example, I always say the moon in Scorpio is like, let's say you're in a, have you ever had like a dying family member and you're like in the hospital? It doesn't matter how much you love them. It's just so hard having that experience. Like, it's just like the hospital vibe and the death and the grossness, and you just want to get out of there. The moon in Sag is like, cool, we're out of there. But then it squares Saturn, where it's like, well, like, I guess I think about this like when I was visiting my dad a lot. Like one time, because he had brain cancer, so we went to Tucson, where they have like the ASU cancer, thing, and it was like, and there was a lot of tumultuous stuff around us visiting him, but it was like, cool, we're out of there. That was super uncomfortable, and I hated every minute of it. But we were still in Tucson. It's like, we're going to come back to this. There's still other parameters that make it uncomfortable, that I have to deal with this. And rather than just looking for an escape and looking to run away from it all, it's kind of like, cool, you have an opportunity to at least get out of that emotional situation, but it's not like, it gives you an opportunity to reframe things, if that makes sense. Then as we go on into Thursday, on Thursday, the moon will make a square to Mercury, and then it will sextile Mars and trine Venus. So I really kind of like what the moon is doing on Thursday, because the moon's in Sag, it's separating from Saturn, right? So it's like, okay, I know where I need to be. I know where I need more impulse control. I know where, if I want to go to point B, I know how I have to be in order to get there. But the moon squares Mercury, where you can dream and envision all day long. Like, this is what I kind of get upset about in the spiritual community. They're like, I'm just manifesting and everything just comes to me. The moon squaring Mercury is kind of like, okay, well, what's your plan to do that? And that's not to say that you can't have a plan to do it, but you got to have some sort of a plan. And the moon in Sag is like, well, I want to do this and I want to do that. And Mercury in Virgo is like, well, what are the logistics around that? Like, how are you actually going to be able to do that? And I've dealt with this a lot lately, because I have like a lot of music video ideas, but then it comes down to like, okay, well, how do I even capture that? And then do I have the budget to do all this other stuff with it? And so sometimes you have to kind of, compromise in a lot of ways of like what that vision is, given what logistics and what resources you have. So the moon in Sag squaring Mercury is kind of like, all right, let's be a little bit more pragmatic and realistic about what is possible here, while still keeping the vision, and how close can we get to that vision with what we have, and getting crafty about it. But if you're just expecting to be like, oh, I'm just going to go and do this visionary thing and everything's going to work, you might get a hard no for that. But the moon will sextile Mars in Libra and trine Venus, which I do really, really like. The moon in Sag, wants to do all these fun things. It's going to sextile Mars in Libra, where, again, there is some other people to, accommodate this journey. There are some other people that can help you, but you have to like let them help you. Like, you can't just, do it all yourself. You might have to learn from someone. You might have to kind of tamper down, your own expectations of what you're capable of, and let someone show you the way, let someone teach you, and not, be in this mindset of like, well, I can just do it all myself and, I'll figure it out on my own. The moon sextiling Mars is like, let someone help you, let someone, kind of guide you in a good direction. But then the moon trines Venus, where, again, Venus in Leo, she's direct. We're almost to the point where Venus gets out of shadow, but the moon trines Venus, it all works out. Like, it's, for example, it's like, you can still get the attention and the spotlight that you want with the vision that you want. You might just need some help, and you just might need better planning on how to do that. So like Wednesday and Thursday, I like Wednesday and Thursday. They're good days. They're just going to require you to handle the situation more maturely and more rationally. Then we get to Friday. The moon's going to square Neptune on Friday. Then it will ingress into Capricorn. It will sextile Saturn. There's another highlight that we have going on Friday, and that's Venus sextiling Mars. I'm going to talk about that after the lunar transits, but I do want to just mention Venus and Mars do not actually make a full sextile, but they get about a degree from one another for about a week. It's like, Mars is applying to Venus, and then they kind of go back and forth, and then Venus starts to separate from Mars. It's like their speed is just lining up in that way. So they don't fully make a sextile, but they will be within about a degree of each other from Friday through this Sunday, and even into like Monday and Tuesday next week. So I'm going to bring it up for like the rest of these 3 days, but when you watch next week's horoscope, I'm not going to bring it up. But anyway, on Friday, the moon is going to make a square to Neptune, and the moon in Sag squaring Neptune, it's kind of, again, it's one of those things where I wouldn't say not everything that glitters is gold, but when you have a vision or you have a point B that you're trying to get to, you have to think about how close to that you can get, because it's going to be really easy to and it's not about like lowering your expectations, but being open to what you can receive. Because like if you're just being like, I want the specific thing, and if I don't get the specific thing, I'm never going to be happy, well, you're going to be unhappy. But if you are open to what you receive, if you're open to what the results are, if you're open to the outcome, well, then you're always going to be happy with what the outcome is. I look at the moon squaring Neptune as there's a part of it, it's like your vision gets blurred a little bit. What I mean by vision is not like your actual eyes, but like, what is your dream? What is your destiny is a little bit of a loaded word for this transit. What is the eventual outcome of something that you want to do? That moon squaring Neptune might get a little bit blurry, might get a little lost in the fog. It might be like, certain things didn't really work out the way that you completely envisioned them. And that's okay. It's just if you're kind of expecting everything to work absolutely perfectly the exact way that you envisioned, then it's not. But I think another thing that I think people struggle with is being specific. We can have these grandiose ideas and we can have this vision, but if we're not super, super specific about it, it's not going to happen. So this is where I think Friday, when the moon squares Neptune, it's a good check of being like, oh, I should have been more specific about this. Oh, I should have took my time with this because this part of it didn't really line up with my expectations. But then the moon goes into Capricorn. It's going to sextile Saturn. Moon in Capricorn, like I always say, it's a good time to detach from your emotions, because I think if you're trying to be like empathetic, if you're trying to be more like connected with your emotions, there's going to be like this block here. Like if you are more connected with your emotions, you're going to have like this block from the outside world. But I always say the moon in Capricorn is just a really good time to get things done. It's kind of like, all right, maybe you're going through a really bad time in your personal life, in your relationships, in your work, whatever it is. Tuning out of that and putting yourself into something where you don't have to feel things. Like I'm always going to preach this, but like idle hands are the devil's workshop. The more that you can get yourself focused on something that requires your attention, it's going to be easier to handle all the other stuff that your mind and your emotions are trying to focus on. So the moon goes into Capricorn. There's kind of this like, rigidity, this kind of earthiness to our emotions. And when I say earthiness, I mean like cold and dry, just being a little bit more, you could say, I don't want to say butthurt, but more so like not very soft and forgiving. Moon in Capricorn is a little bit more unforgiving. And then the moon's going to sextile Saturn. And the thing that I love about like the Saturn and Pisces stuff is like when the moon's in Scorpio versus the moon's in Capricorn, these are all opportunities to understand where we have to be more responsible with, our own, inward beliefs, our own inward expectations, our own like spiritual, like our own like frequency, our own energy. Like Saturn and Sagittarius, again, like Sagittarius is that point B, like I just want to go. And Saturn's like, all right, let's define that a little bit more. Let's make a plan for it. Saturn and Pisces is like, who do you have to be to become that? Like, let's say you want to be, let's just say for an easy example, let's say you want to be a millionaire. Who do you have to become that? Do you have to be more responsible? Do you have to, plan ahead? Do you have to be more business savvy? Do you have to understand how finances work? Do you understand how to do, your taxes? Do you understand how to open an LLC? Like that sort of a thing. And Saturn and Pisces is like really checking us on like, who do we have to be on an inward level? Who do we believe about ourselves in order to materialize that? And the moon in Capricorn just sextiling Saturn is kind of like, yeah, like, cool. I'm focusing on this and I understand that this is a good place for me to be in order to accomplish that task. And coming back to Venus sextiling Mars is, so they don't actually make a sextile. And that's important to note because there's not like this specific event that it's like, oh, the day Venus sextiles Mars, cool, that's going to be like notable in some fashion. But there is an energy of like fun in working with other people and surrendering. For example, if Venus wants to be in Leo, right? Mars in Libra for think of any artist, like let's say like Beyonce, for example. I always think that's a funny there's a funny story about like one of her big songs where there's like 30 writers on it and there's like five words that is in this whole song. But like Beyonce is going to be Beyonce. She's going to get the stage no matter what. But given her situation as, one of the biggest artists in the world, she's going to have other people write her songs, make her beats. And Venus in Leo sextiling Mars in Libra is like, if you're trying to control the whole situation and fight for a certain idea, you're gonna have this resistance. Sometimes you have to just like surrender and say, all right, what's this person's way of doing things? What's this person's way of going about this idea? And like you're still gonna get, I mean, it's imagine you're Beyonce. You're still gonna be the one on stage singing it, you're still gonna get all the credit for it, but you may not just be in control of the situation. So in my opinion, it's a lot of fun if you allow it to be fun. But if you're really focusing on controlling the situation, you're probably going to be a lot more combative. You're going to be a lot more irritable, and it's not going to be fun. But if you allow other people to assist you and you kind of disarm yourself, then it will be a lot more fun. And again, this is happening Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and even the next week. So that's kind of just a general vibe for this weekend and early next week. So then we go into Saturday. And again, Venus is still with Mars there in a sextile. But on Saturday, the moon is going to trine Mercury. Then it's going to trine Jupiter. But then it's going to square Mars. And of course, one of the other highlights that we have on Saturday is the sun goes into Libra. That's really the main highlight of this week is fall begins. Now, there's kind of a few different perspectives I want to take about this because if the sun is our energy and our willpower and our identity, and our vitality, the sun is going to its sign of fall. It's going into a very weak place where there isn't this strong sense of, independence or, self-preservation. The sun in Libra is, again, focusing on, balance with other people, working with other people, and that egocentric point of view of like selfishness is not really there. So if you try to lean more into it, it's not really going to work. What will work though is like, again, surrendering to things, surrendering to working with people, balancing things out. So that's one part of it. But the other part is we're going into eclipse season. These are technically our first set of eclipses in the Libra Aries axis with the nodes there, I should say. And so Mars is getting closer and closer to K2. This inner sense of massive change, I think, is going to really kind of come on Saturday. And the reason I say it that way is kind of like, when you're watching a movie and maybe we're like 15 minutes, which is long in a movie world, or like 20 minutes or 30 minutes before the climax, there might be a certain event where you go, oh, like now we're building up to it. Now we're getting, that is the context shift that like brings us closer to that climax. That's how I feel about the sun in Libra. And, especially with the ruler of Rahu, the North Node, it's in Aries, the ruler of it being Mars in detriment near K2. We have quite a bit that is churning underneath the surface here. So that's another part of the sun going into Libra. But if we talk about the moon for a minute, the moon will be making a trine to Mercury and it will trine Jupiter. While the moon's in Capricorn, I really like this for getting things done, solutions, opportunities. Like for most of the day on Saturday, it's really, really, really good. With the moon, again, trining Mercury, trining Jupiter, it's like, cool, we have a plan. We stick to the plan. It trines Jupiter. It's like there's just like a lot of validation there of like, cool, I did that thing. And now I understand. And when I'm just patient about things and I take my time, they can work out. But then the moon squares Mars. And this can be a much more problematic transit if you let it be, but it doesn't have to be. The moon in Capricorn squaring Mars in Libra is like the moon squaring Mars, right? Like our emotions are not really lining up with like our actions, or they are conflicted with like, confrontation or aggression. And Mars in Libra is like very passive, right? Like, there's some people that are much more just like aggressive and upfront with you and blunt. Mars in Libra is much more passive aggressive. And the moon in Capricorn, it's like Mars is in detriment, the moon's in detriment. There's this, like some people are being passive aggressive and you're not really necessarily being, empathetic to the situation. You're being cold and dry. There's kind of just like this, I don't want to say just reality check, but this like, hey, maybe tune in a little bit. Like who's being passive aggressive? Are you being passive aggressive or someone else is? And maybe this is an opportunity to be a little bit more, hey, like this is how I feel about something. But depending on who you are in that situation, the moon's going to be in Capricorn. Maybe someone else's Mars in Libra and your moon in Capricorn. Maybe you need to check in and say, maybe I'm being a little bit too dry and too cold right now. Maybe I can, open up my heart and be a little bit more understanding of the situation, or vice versa. Maybe, someone's being cold and dry, not understanding the situation, and you're being too passive aggressive about it. And maybe you need to be a little bit more confrontational about it. And that's not saying pick a fight and start a fight, because that's not going to work here, but just, saying it how it is, essentially. And so the moon squaring Mars at the end of the day on Saturday is frustrating, no matter what. But the rest of the day before is so good. So don't let that part of it ruin it for you. Just know that, it's kind of like at the end of the day, and, everyone's cranky and everyone's like tired. That's kind of the energy on Saturday evening. But then we get to Sunday, and the moon's going to then make a trine to Uranus. It will sextile Neptune, and it will ingress into Aquarius. And again, Venus is still sextiling Mars. So again, working with other people, you just have to surrender. It's going to work out. But the moon will make that trine to Uranus, where, again, some sort of a solution, some sort of a breakthrough. I like that. And then it will sextile Neptune, where the reason I hesitate to say something, because it's just kind of like, okay, the moon's going to sextile Neptune. That's not the biggest deal. And I know I talk about this every single week, and you guys are probably tired of me talking about it. It's not really the biggest deal. So we're going to take this down a couple points in terms of like how important it is. But I just look at the moon trining Uranus and sextiling Neptune as like, okay, there's a solution that is available to you. It will probably be very random and sudden and kind of like just a crazy idea. And then the moon sextiles Neptune, where this allows for, being like, oh, okay, well, now I'm a little bit more closer to my vision. Now I'm a little bit more closer to the exact way, my most idealistic way of seeing the situation. But it's just a sextile, right? So it's just kind of like, oh, cool, that worked out. And now I'm a little bit more on the path that I wanted to be. But then the moon ingresses into Aquarius. And I didn't write this down as like a major transit to bring up, but the sun is in Libra, and the moon is in Aquarius. Both of the luminaries are in these air signs. So when we're talking about all these air signs, we're talking about, again, information. Like all the air signs are like people. Like Gemini is the twins, like conversing one-on-one. Libra is more of relationships, balance, justice, peace. And Aquarius is more of larger society as a whole. So all this has to do with people and information and how we work with one another. And I just look as the sun and the moon in these like people-oriented signs, there's a much like more open-minded, less like everything being in Virgo and earth signs is like, I just care about the numbers. I just care about getting things done. Both of the luminaries in these air signs is more open and receptive to other people and connecting with other people. And of course, the moon's in Aquarius. It's going to be more connected with society as a whole, and all of that kind of good stuff. And that's what I got for you guys this week. As we get into next week, we have a lot more going on next week that's a lot more exciting. Mercury's going to trine Jupiter. This is our third and final trine to Jupiter, so you better make it last. We have the full moon in Aries that I am due to a Patreon follower that I love and adore, and I cannot remember her name at this moment to save my life, and I know she's going to be mad at me. Full moon in Aries, it's a pseudo eclipse. It's so close to being an eclipse, and it bothers me that it's not. But we have this full moon in Aries next week. We have Venus squaring Uranus next week. So this is our third and final Venus-Uranus square. Mercury leaves shadow next week, and Mercury will make a trine to Uranus immediately as it leaves shadow. So next week has a lot more solutions, a lot more action going on than this week. So with that being said, make sure you stick around. Make sure you subscribe to see next week's horoscope. And with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.